Welcome back to Return to Heart. In this episode, Jeff Schulte and Phil Herndon discuss how the brain uses addiction to manage fear, shame, and loneliness, and why the real antidote isn't willpower, but connection. Let's get started.
Well, Phil, today we get to talk about something I don't know anything about.
What could that be? You know about everything.
Actually, by personal experience, I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't know something about this topic. It's not because I know it in my head; it's because I just know it. Yeah, my life, unfortunately, revealed it to me. And anyway, so I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about.
Well, what, pray tell, is it?
Well, first, it kind of comes out of where we just were. You know, we just talked about codependence. And this whole thing about how we learn in the progression of this transformational process we're talking about, the way that we deal with rejection and abandonment is that we somehow then become, we lose our internal world, and now I'm only okay if you're okay with me, and I become a performer, like I'm managing you, okay, rather than having me in front of you. And part of how I manage you is that you don't get to have any, I can't let you have any feelings because that's uncomfortable, which really means I can't have my own, so I lose my voice, and I go in, and I really become an externally focused rather than inwardly present with you. Yeah. And we talked about that last time. Yep. But that's exhausting.
Yes.
I always tell people, relationships are not exhausting. Codependence in relationships is exhausting. We're made for relationships. Introvert or extrovert, it doesn't matter. We're made to connect and attach in relationships. So it's not the relationships that wear us out, it's the management of those relationships, which is codependence. So what we're going to talk about today is addiction, which is one of the ways that we try to manage the exhaustion, okay, of that codependence. What do I do how do I turn that off? How do I stop that thing in me that's not okay because no one around me is okay?
Right.
And then what do I do with these feelings that I'm still having even though I can't have them?
Yeah, Jeff, I'm hearing the masses say, I don't drink, I don't smoke, don't cuss much, never did drugs, so I probably just better turn off this thing because I don't have addiction. So,
well, I can talk a lot about those, but also I remember one time my son was in my office, and I've accumulated some diplomas on that wall, and I got enough healthy shame to say that I've done that with my life. I've educated myself, continued to educate myself. I'm going back and get master's degrees in my 50s. I've worked really hard on that part of me, okay, but also enough healthy shame not to have to say what all of it was, except that I've worked hard that way to educate myself to be good at what I do. But my son was standing in my office, and they're all in one place. They have to be in my office, by the way, because of what I do as a therapist, counselor, and all that, coach. So my credentials are up there. My son was standing in my office, and he looked at all of it. I mean, and there's some in Latin because it's an Ivy League. It's all on there, okay? My son stood there, and he looked at me, and he goes, "Gosh, Dad," he goes, "when you see it all up there on the wall, it's pretty impressive." And I stood there for a minute with him, and actually I said to him, "Yeah, son, it's also pretty sad." Mm-hmm. It's sad, not that I've done that. What was sad is the thing in me that was driven to do that was really an addictive behavior that said, I have to perform to be loved. Mm-hmm. And you can say, well, yeah, but it produced it. And I go, yeah, but the engine was not burning clean gas.
Yeah.
And it was addiction. I was addicted to performance as a means of acceptance. And you go, well, is that addiction? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's why a lot of guys, men and women, they burn out. They get fried. It doesn't have a shelf life. It's not sustainable for most people over time. I work with a lot of guys mid to middle life, 40s, 50s, who have rung the bell, and then they're going, well, now what?
Right.
That kind of thing. So I go, that's a form of addictive behavior. Mm-hmm. It looks acceptable. In fact, a lot of people love the fact that I was addicted to performance because my performance benefited them. So it's not just your typical stuff, although I've dealt with some of those too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you and I and Todd have worked a long time with people in addiction.
Yeah.
Widespread, and a lot of it, maybe the majority of it, hasn't been drugs, alcohol, et cetera. It has been these type things. Mm-hmm. And, people go, well, man, he's got an addiction problem, and we've said it 1,000, cumulatively 1,000,000 times. addiction is not your problem. Addiction has become your solution. And, addiction delivers on what it says it's going to, because you mentioned earlier codependency, like, man, this is so heavy to carry. I just can't do this. I've got to get relief from paying so much attention to other people and not to me. And that's where addiction comes in. Addiction is the scientific, it's a brain dysfunction, it's a brain disorder, a pathological reliance on an ego defense mechanism that continues despite negative consequences. And what that simply means is, I don't care if it's harmful for me or not. It puts to sleep these feelings I'm having about my life. And that's what makes it worth it.
Puts to sleep these feelings I'm having. How many of us can't put down our phones?
Yeah.
And I know that's low fruit. That's easy. Like, I come home and, people are on their phones.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an addictive behavior. This has happened more than once, where Brenda will find me standing in the pantry, and I'm just standing there looking, like I'm looking around in the pantry. And she'll say, "Are you hungry?" And I'll say, "Actually, I'm not." She's just like, "Well, what are you doing in there?" And if I stand there for a minute and kind of check in with myself, I remember this happened not long ago, and I just said, "Gosh, I think I'm just lonely." Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think I've had huge food issues, other than scarcity stuff, have to do with my childhood, which that's another whole issue. But in that moment, I'm about ready to try to use food to medicate loneliness. Well, that's an impaired attempt to deal with my life, which is an addictive behavior, which we can use food to do that. Whenever I would teach somewhere or do something that was really scary to me, getting in front of people is really, probably don't look like it, but I get afraid, okay, because people have the power to reject me in those moments.
Yeah.
And I would go speak somewhere, some event or something, a conference, and then I would find that afterward, I'm more aware of this now, but I would just go crazy. Especially carbohydrates. Like, I would just try to find chips and salsa, stuff I normally probably wouldn't pound. I'm looking for desserts and I don't eat sweets. Like, I would eat myself into oblivion after I did it.
Yeah.
Because now I'm dealing with the feelings I had about this thing that I had to do or I just did.
That's right.
That's all in this territory. It's all in the territory of addiction. Now we can go to the classics, but that's addictive type behavior based on your definition.
Yes, and a lot of listeners and our viewers, one thing that's really coming to bear, we can point to the reasons why, the internet, all these things, but pornography addiction in particular is at least being exposed as being really pandemic levels. And what it does, it so puts to sleep the feelings I'm having about my life. Part of the power of it is Christian men and women know, I don't need to look at this. This is destructive to my marriage. It's a sin. It's all these other things. And yet I keep going back. And it's speaking to what you're talking about, Jeff. Like, I'm having feelings about my life, my marriage, my whatever it may be, my manhood, my womanhood, my identity. And I've got to find something that puts that to sleep, that takes that away. And addiction, the brain is beautifully predictive. And what addiction does, it runs in a cycle. And so the brain loves a cycle. The brain loves something happening over and over and over again. I get into a routine. It's called chunking. And so, for instance, the first time I drive somewhere, I have to turn by turn. And if the third or fourth time I go there, I don't have to memorize it anymore. Mm-hmm. I just know how to get there. Well, that's called chunking. The brain's like, we can make this super efficient. If you're going to go here over and over, I'll just make this one thing. You don't have to remember turn by turn. You just go there. And if you ever, what street is that? You're living in a town and go, gosh, I don't even know the name of that street. I just go there.
I just drove 30 minutes and didn't think about any of it.
That's what the brain does. Yeah. And so the brain does that with its own self in this addictive process. It goes, I've got a predictable way to make feelings go to sleep, to get away from all of this, whether it's pornography, drugs, alcohol, accomplishment, power, education, whatever it is. And so the beautiful, quote unquote, thing about addiction is it speaks to this hunger the human brain has for chunking things, making things a ritual and a routine, and an added bonus of it takes away all these feelings I'm having about stuff.
Well, I love the way you said that. Puts these feelings to sleep.
Yes.
We'll go back to when we talked about codependence. I become codependent. One of the ways I manage is to try to keep you from having feelings about anything, but especially feelings about me.
For sure.
Which is why I have to do something with my feelings And that's where addiction comes in, is it then helps. That's the way I put to sleep my feelings. Mm-hmm. And then what fires together wires together. So like you said it, the first time I find something that works, that helps me deal with these feelings, now I start being able to drive unconsciously.
Yes.
And it becomes a default for me. You tell a story, I've heard you tell, if you don't mind telling it, about the time that you walked into your house and it was the story around when you walked into your house and, oh, this is how I can do this. Can you tell that story?
Oh, around the
when you first time you had alcohol.
Yes. Well, that is a sad example. I was 15 years old, and my friend and I got into his dad's liquor cabinet at 15. And I came from a place of really scary growing up, physically and otherwise scary. And I got just a little bit tipsy. I really, in my 15-year-old brain, I really knocked some down, but I was actually just kind of buzzy. But even being kind of buzzy, I remember walking across his yard and thinking to myself, this is the first time I've ever gone home and not been afraid. Huh. And I thought, man, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life.
Magic.
This is magical elixir. And so that started, so I didn't particularly enjoy what tasted to me like cough syrup going down my throat for the first time. But man, the impact that it had, and what that is, this gets into a chemical, not just chemical addiction. But there's a great book, if I could think of the author, I'd call her name. It's called Dopamine Nation.
Oh, yeah.
And what we know about dopamine
Excellent, by the way. Excellent.
is a great book.
Dopamine.
So dopamine is a chemical that is meant to be spritzed into our brains a little at a time. I wake up in the morning and I smell coffee, dopamine, and I pet my dog, dopamine. I'm getting this reading, dopamine. So all through the day we're made for that. Well, what that did for me is when I recognized I'm not afraid to go home, it opened up a pipeline of dopamine for my system. I was covered with it. So my brain went, why mess with all this other stuff when I can have this 6-inch pipeline opened up and it's just dopamine coursing through me? Well, the problem is that comes from a place, the place in the brain that's activated is called the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens is the part of the brain that says, okay, cue the dopamine. Well, it comes from a part of the brain called the VTA, ventral tegmental area, and it's kind of the warehouse for the dopamine. And so what happens is if I repeat that action, whatever it may be, if I repeat that action, the VTA says that's a little bit too much dopamine for such little activity. So I'm going to cut back on this. Well, that's what we call increased tolerance. And so you'll notice that pornography moves from fantasy to still pictures, to videos, to more and more and more intense videos. My drinking went from little buzzes, tipsy, to really throwing it on. And food moves from occasional binging to a lifestyle of eating and eating and eating, or restricting my eating for the power, or more and more work. There's never enough. It gets very Ecclesiastes at this point.
Yeah.
So there's not enough activity. There's not enough dopamine to ever satiate or to actually gratify my heart. But that's the reason it continues. It gets locked in that pattern of addictive cycle, driven by other things, but certainly driven by dopamine and how the brain loves it.
One of the ways it helps me understand that, and I'm glad you went there, is and I'm going to simplify it, okay? It's almost like I'm holding my hands up here and I got all 5 fingers pointing at each other. And my right hand is a sender, my left hand is a receiver. Mm-hmm. And there's neuro pathway, like I'm sending across the chasm from my sender to my receiver, and you're flooding from the sender. Yes. 5 are sending to 5 in spurts, and that's appropriate. But when this is just always on, the brain is so efficient, it's saying too much. The receiver has to get small. So now I got 3 receivers to the 5 because I can't. The uptake, it just says no, that's not good for me. So then when I'm not sending all of that to the 3, all of life kind of feels like a gray sky.
That's right. Yes.
Because nothing's ever enough. Then you said petting the dog, talking to a child, connecting with your spouse.
Yes.
a beautiful day, even a sunset, those things that used to be very satisfying because they came with a spritz. Now, all of a sudden, that spritz is like a squirt gun in the ocean.
Yeah.
Because the brain has gotten so used to an ocean of water and then efficiently cut back on what it could receive because it was too much for the brain. The brain is so beautifully efficient.
It really is.
Trying to protect us from that. Well, then the problem is now I'm stuck in this addictive cycle that I keep trying to send more to get more.
Yes.
Could be anything, by the way. For me, your story was alcohol, walking into your living room. For me, it was, I remember finding a small, grainy, 1 inch by 1 inch advertisement for an X-rated drive-in movie theater. Like, that tells you how long ago that was, near where we lived. And it wasn't even, the picture wasn't pornographic, but it was pornographic to me as like a 7 or 8 year old. And I remember seeing that, and part of my story is why I was ripe for this, so prepared for this moment.
Yeah.
I remember flipping through the Journal-Herald, was the newspaper I actually delivered to college. But I remember turning to the back where they had the advertising stuff, and then there was this picture of this woman, and it was about 1 inch by 1 inch. And I just remember looking at that picture, and something in me locked on, like almost like when you described alcohol for you, and you look in the media too, or watch any TV program. Anytime something bad happens, they almost always look for a drink.
Yeah.
Like, that's the answer to, I just heard bad news, okay? So for me, I'm looking at this 1 by 1 inch, little grainy black and white print in a newspaper. And something about the way that woman looked at me in that ad grabbed me the way you felt walking into that house. And it was just like this flood, like the gateway was going, oh my God, she wants me, and that was easy. And I cut it out, and I saved it. God, and you look now, you probably flip past, won't even notice it. But somehow, that said to me, oh, okay, there's a place I can go in my brain. I didn't have to take a drink. There's a place I go in my brain with a thought that this woman she loves me and she's not going to leave me, which, by the way, for what age I was, that's not even sexual, but it doesn't matter. It connects. Does that make sense when I say that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, notice what you said.
Yeah.
You said the way she looked at me, like she wasn't looking at you. That's a picture. But
no, Phil. I swear, she was thinking about me when they took the picture.
Isn't that amazing, though?
And he was looking right into my soul.
So this left brain data thing, like no,
Oh God.
But limbically, quote unquote, emotionally, notice the connective piece of that. And that's another chemical called oxytocin. We can talk about that at some point, maybe. But notice the relational language you're using with a picture in a grainy newspaper. You and I are old. We're a month apart in age. So this
pre-internet, any of that. I hadn't had hands on a Playboy magazine yet. This was just a newspaper.
Yeah, I don't know if my son, who's 30, knows what delivering a newspaper means. But so you and I are old guys.
Oh my gosh.
That's our start and all that. But it really struck me. And I hope the viewers and listeners heard that, because you didn't do that on purpose. You weren't doing shtick. You said the way she was looking at me and all those things, like, that's addiction. It was addressing your limbic system, your right brain, it's called, and you found something for connection. Johann Hari, another great resource, he has a famous TED Talk called All You Thought You Knew About Addiction Is Wrong.
Yeah.
He also wrote a great book called Chasing the Scream, and in that book, he makes the comment, he said, we don't need to use the word addiction, we need to use the word connection. And that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connecting. He said it shouldn't be called addiction, it should be called bonding. And the opposite of addiction is connection. And look at the counterfeit fulfillment you got. That was the beginning of what turned into a lot more in the territory of this addictive process you were in. But it really struck me when you said that, like, man, he really is just a smart guy with all the diplomas. Like, this guy's smart. And he said the way she looked at me. And even if you hear anything in this podcast about addiction, take that with you. Addiction is based on a connection with something that gives us that idea of connection, of being wanted, loved, cared about. How many times have you heard, Jeff, as a therapist, a coach, how many times have you heard, man, the first time I blanked, the first time I saw pornography, it was like a hug, a warm blanket, everything was okay. And all those words and phrases describe connection and attachment. That's the reason we say addiction is your solution. We know it's unhealthy, know it's sin, know it has negative consequences, but the image of God in us and the move toward connection is that strong.
Man, and not only is it that strong, but then we don't know how to get out. Like I always say, someone, and I've been there, who's stuck in an addictive process. If you use the metaphor driving a car, it's I've got a gas pedal and I've got a forward drive, and I know that I don't like what it's doing. I know I don't like how I feel. I know there's always an end to it, that I wake up and go, what did I do, or what was that about, or I don't like what it's doing to my life. Okay, but all I know how to do, the only thing I know how to do with that, ultimately, the brain says, well, I know how to help you there. I'll help you the way I've been helping you, and it is I'm just going to hit the gas and plow forward to get more of what I need to be okay. Because by the way, some of the feelings I don't want to have to deal with are also guilt and shame.
For sure.
I'm trying to get away from those as much as I'm trying to get away from loneliness or hurt or sadness or anger or anything else like that. And so now I've got all this guilt and shame associated, okay, with whatever I'm doing, that the way out of it, my brain doesn't help me stop doing it. That's right. It just says you need more of the thing that's actually causing the guilt and shame, which now is exacerbating this wheel called addiction. And we don't have a reverse gear, okay, and we don't know how to tap the brake pedal to actually begin to get what we really need, which is connection.
That's right. And you're mentioning briefly, you said, we get into this rhythm, this place, and that can even happen with two very common phenomena today, anxiety and depression. And so we can even get into an addictive relationship with those two conditions. Depression is anger I'm not allowing to do what it's made to do, to move me towards something and to deal with pain. That's what anger does.
Yeah.
If I don't deal with it, if I don't allow it, I get depressed. Anxiety is the recognition I live in a dangerous place. There are things that are dangerous. Anxiety says, let your body take over, let it deal with it. And I begin to be reliant upon, I get connected to the power of depression and the power of anxiety. I've told people for years, anxiety is like these, when my son was little, he had a gerbil. And the gerbil has a plastic ball that ran around in.
I remember that.
Well, that's anxiety. It puts a ball around us. I can see out. You can see me, but I'm in my ball of protection. It's very addictive. Like if I don't have my anxiety, what am I going to do to not be anxious is to be disrobed. Now, it feels like I'm disrobed in anxiety. Anxiety protects me from the vulnerability of admitting my fear, and it gets very addictive to be anxious and not just simply afraid. It becomes very addictive to be depressed and not put myself in that vulnerable place of communicating my anger, moving into these painful places with clarity.
So you just said two things I want you to say more about. One is how anxiety is an avoidance of the vulnerability of my fear. And that depression isn't about sadness. Right. Depression is about my unwillingness to care, that it's too dangerous to care, so I'm going to depress that thing in me that wants to get up and go live my life.
Yes. And those things are very powerful, and they're very connecting. So my identity becomes depression or anxiety. That's the reason if you've ever tried to talk anyone out of their depression or anxiety, you better pack several lunches. It's not going to happen. Because it's reason, my mom was a nurse for almost 50 years, and she would talk about her astonishment that she would know pulmonary specialists who smoked themselves to death, liver specialists or surgeons or internal medicine docs who drank themselves to death. She'd be like, what in the world? Like, well, it's the same process. Like people will remain in a depressive and anxiety state knowing they're missing out on their lives, But these doctors who are smoking, these doctors who are drinking, they know the consequences, but they're so drawn to the relief that provides. We're so drawn to the power and relief anxiety provides from how vulnerable I feel when I'm afraid, or how vulnerable I feel when I'm angry, or really want something to be different. I stay in my depression. It gets very addictive.
So that's something important. Well, I think all what you said, I don't like it, but it's important. I don't like how true it can be and how true it's been in my life. But you said this is really important, that ultimately even the rehearsal of negative consequences is not enough to help me change.
No.
Now, we're not going to get to there today. We're going to go into the way back, okay? We're just talking about what happens. This is what we're talking about today, again, is how we deal with our codependence, which is how we dealt with the rejection, with how we dealt with living in a fallen world and all the things that happen in relationships. Right. So we're just naming it out here in this thing called addiction. We're going to talk about the way back. But
That's right.
One of the ways that isn't back is that I need to know, Jeff, here's a list of all the things you're blowing up about your life if you keep doing what you're doing. That's dealing with the rational part of my brain. Then the moment when I need relief, that part of the brain is nowhere to be found. And it's one of the things that even with AA was started by some Christian men that knew that the church wasn't providing a solution to addiction. Mm-hmm. The church was providing condemnation, and you need to fix yourself, and what's wrong with you that you keep drinking, and you're going to blow up your life, your job, and your marriage, and your children. And guys kept drinking. And what they said was, no, we don't, actually the church wasn't being helpful. So they created something outside the church called AA, where guys could sit around in circles and experience connection.
Yes.
Keep coming back. I'm not alone here. Mm-hmm. I've got a sponsor I can talk to. I'm sitting around listening to other guys talk about their own insanity and their own surrender and their own consequences. In fact, their consequences help me to see what I don't want. It's amazing what happens in a 12-step room.
That's right.
But that had to happen outside the territory of condemnation or go fix yourself or this is what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Because addiction is not rational. It becomes irrational.
Yes. And as irrational as it is, it works.
It's very rational that way. I love it. I like war movies and stuff. And it's almost merciful. Like one of my favorite, the last one was Hacksaw Ridge. Lord, give me one more, give me one more. Mm-hmm. And you always see this in Band of Brothers. Any of these is when a guy is laying there on a battlefield and half his legs blown off. It is merciful when that medic pops that morphine stick into that guy's quad.
Yeah, man.
And you know what? You see a guy going. He's looking down. His foot's over there and his knees over there and then they stick that morphine stick in, and you see the guy just go, whew. Mm-hmm. And I look at that and I go, that's merciful, merciful. And in some ways, some of our addictive behavior, it's for a child for you walking into that house, and that's all you had, that was a morphine stick for a kid on the battlefield whose leg was in pieces.
You bet.
For me and there's a story behind this. We're going to develop this in another podcast, more specific in our stories. But for me, where I was at that period of my life, to find that 1 by 1 inch grainy black and white photo of that woman, she was a morphine stick for me. That was almost merciful to relieve pain of what was happening to my life for that little boy that had no one, not for what I needed at least, helping me through the implosion of my family.
Yes.
And I needed a safe place, and I found it in her. That look, all of a sudden I went, oh my gosh, and I'd say this. Now, even though that it set off a series of actions, activities, compulsive behavior, addiction. Then it got shoved underground because I substituted addiction, to being lusted after, to an addiction, actually a performance in ministry and some of those diplomas and even what I did in ministry and as a pastor and as all that stuff. I had periods of long-term what would be called sobriety, but really I traded one addiction for the other. Mm-hmm. I went from an addiction to pornography and being lusted after to addiction to making everybody really love me and love what I did.
Yeah.
Okay. And I thought I was over the addiction, the primary one, which then I was, and it was just in the weeds waiting on me. Mm-hmm. And it blew up again later when I got into my 40s again. It was the primary addiction. Again, we'll develop those stories in this podcast later, but at least as we focus on it today, I've been able to look back now and say, absence of the connection that I was looking for.
That's right.
There was nothing wrong with that little boy who was looking for connection. Now, what I found was almost destroyed my life eventually. But that thing in me that wanted that is one of the things that's most profound and beautiful about me. I just found a behavior or an activity that created a brain reaction to give me a sense of relief and almost euphoria.
Yes, that's right. And what you're describing is both this stick, kind of your visual of the morphine stick, but it's also the anticipation of it coming. And that's what keeps the cycle going. And addiction's not dumb.
Yeah.
And what, we is a thing called preoccupation. And I've told people for a long time, our occupation as humans is to live. And you put the prefix pre in front of that. And addiction says, hey, before you can really live, you do this or get this in your bloodstream or get this payoff. And that's what we call preoccupation. That's one of
the high starts before the activity
for sure.
Before the substance.
It's called anticipatory dopamine. I start thinking about getting to that. And that's where we start thinking about, we've mentioned in a previous podcast, the Bible means what it means. Not just what it says, but what it means. So when we say take every thought captive, that doesn't just mean stop thinking about that. That means you're thinking about this. What's underneath your thoughts of getting to that alcohol, that pornography, that whatever, that accomplishment, whatever it is. And when we start asking those kinds of questions, we're taking thoughts captive in a way that says, I'm in preoccupation. We'll talk about this later too as we talk about the way out of this. Yeah. But preoccupation leads to ritualization. I start creating an external environment that makes the acting out or the getting to what I'm after conducive. It sets the stage. And those two territories really deliver loads of dopamine and loads of these thoughts about connection. And so even when we pay attention to the brain being so predictive and how addiction leverages how the brain works and delivers that dopamine and delivers that connecting chemical called oxytocin in a very predictable way, when we start thinking about, no wonder addiction is a solution, it literally caters to what the brain is after. It begins as being very adaptive and gets really sick and maladaptive. And that's where most of the time we go, I've hit rock bottom, as we call it. Yeah. And we start digging out of that. We'll talk about later. But addiction as a tonic, as an antidote to my codependency, including how we live addictively with anxiety and depression, is super powerful. And so when people are struggling with this out there, if you hang with us in how to start moving out of this, but just know that you're not crazy around this, because what you think it was doing for you at the beginning, it was. That doesn't mean it was okay. It means it was doing what it said. It was providing relief of this people-pleasing and all the other pain that we have. So if you're listening here and this has gotten to your attention, just know that your brain loves the process of addiction, the ritualization, the predictive nature of it, the relief it delivers, the dopamine it dumps. And where you're in peril is, how in the world do I get out of this? Because it is truly, literally an addiction cycle.
And then when I'm in the cycle, typically, I also, by definition, because that's where I'm experiencing connection, it starts removing me from real connection with God and others.
Yeah.
Which now is a problem. Yeah. That it's the one place where I'm connecting. And then in the isolation with God and others that I feel, okay, it's in that isolation that then also the secrecy of that, the deception sometimes around that, the keeping secrets around that, we begin to compartmentalize maybe internally, like where we have to somehow, like we're living this life over here, I'm walking in the door, and I'm an engaged and connected husband and dad.
Yeah.
But this part of me that was over here doing something else before I got home or whatever it was, Like that almost doesn't, I think that didn't almost exist.
That's right.
Okay. So it's so funny. I was so addicted to people pleasing. And man, I made so many mistakes in my marriage around this, especially when I was a pastor of a large church. I remember one time, we have 6 kids, and they were all young, and I remember I didn't know how to turn off any of those people, even when I came home. Okay. And one time, I'm sitting at the dinner table, and all my kids are talking. They were all little. 6 of them sitting around. There's 8 of us around this table, and they're all doing what kids do when Dad's home. We're all sitting there eating a meal. And I remember Brenda. Man, this is so beautiful. I look back now. I remember her saying to them in front of me, "Kids, stop talking. Your dad's not home yet. He's not here. Now, you think he is, but just hold on till he gets here." God. And she was trying to help them, like, to honor them, like, pay attention. Your dad's not present, really. But you know what it was I was still in my head helping people, solving problems, fixing things, in the addiction of my need to perform and succeed as a pastor, my need to please everybody and everybody be okay with me.
Yeah. It
was easier for me to be high on that. I was doing a drug, sitting in front of my wife and kids and not being present with them. Yes. And my wife finally had the voice to call it out.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't fix me in that moment, but it sure was her beginning to say, it was the beginning of this, her beginning to say, something's not right with you, that you're not with us. Yes. You're doing all these things. You're having a meal with us. And all the other things I was doing as a dad and a husband, I was doing a lot of the right things. But she was starting to identify the fact that I was emotionally not present with myself or now with my family because, and she was sensing it early here, I was beginning to slide off into not just a performance addiction, but this is when the pornography was starting to kind of reemerge because truthfully, the performance addiction was no longer satisfying.
That's right.
Because it wasn't giving me the hits that it initially did that helped replace pornography in the first place, which is why pornography came flying back like a match on a dry hay barn.
Right.
And my wife, she didn't see that, but she saw me not there.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we won't get into it today for time, but just to go, it was going to take my life.
Yes. And what she was addressing was kind of where we started.
Yeah.
We kind of land where we took off. We started with several episodes ago talking about the Imago Dei.
Yeah.
We have the image of God. And we live in a broken world where abandonment and disconnection happen. And we're going to create a false narrative. We humans are going to do that. About ourselves, and to get relief from that false narrative, we're going to move in this territory called codependency, very powerful and so burdensome we can't bear it for long, and we get relief through addiction we've talked about today. So next time we're going to start talking about, okay, here we are, highly anxious, depressed, can't get out of the loop in some kind of addictive cycle. So next time we'll start talking about, okay, where do we start to start digging out of this thing?
Yeah. There has to be a way out.
Yeah, and there is.
And there is. And that is where we'll go next time.
Right on. Hope you'll join us next time.
Thanks again for joining us on Return to Heart. To access resources mentioned on this program or to find out more about Tin Man Ministries, please go to tinman.org.